Good morning, good evening, good night, NBN, Entrepreneurship and Leadership.
Personally, I'm fascinated by the story.
Trust is an underrated weapon in the business landscape.
I'm a really, really strong believer in learning by doing.
What's the definition of success?
You're trying to come up with an answer to the question. But go ahead, Richard.
You could be right, but you're wrong. Good morning, good evening, good night, Entrepreneurship and Leadership channel listeners on the New Books Network. I'm here with my friend and co-host, Kimon Fountoukidis, get your name right.
Thank you, Richard. Massacred it.
After all these years. And our very special guest, Krzysztof Zdanowski, who's the CEO and founder of Summa Linguae Technologies. I could try and introduce you, Krzysztof, but I think you'll do a better job of it than me. So could you just tell everyone who you are in a minute or so in the way you would if you met someone new at a business networking event or even a party?
Hello, guys. Thank you for hosting me. It's always a pleasure. So my name is Krzysztof. I come from and live in Krakow, Poland. I think we're neighbors, more or less. And I run a company called Summa Linguae Technologies, a company I started about 11 years ago. And what we do is we help global content-rich companies streamline and curate their multilingual content. We also help global NLP builders with their data requests or their data needs. I know what
NLP stands for, but just for because like this is not, by the way, this isn't localization or like a tech, so they might just so everybody knows what that is.
Yeah, so it's well, put it this way, let me rephrase. For every AI product you need data to learn from, and we provide that data. That'll be a simpler way to put it.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction. And you said you've been doing this for 11 years. Is this your first business? Maybe you give a bit about your age and your personal situation, because we can see you here, but a lot of people are listening and they can't see that you look pretty young to be a CEO.
I'm 35. Yes, so this is really my first business. I moved to Krakow, Poland, to study. I did my BA here in Krakow, and I come from a bilingual family. My mom's from Canada. So I'm just inherently very lazy, as I think many entrepreneurs are, in a way. And so English and Polish, and I spoke both of the languages. So I just started in interpreting to pay my bills in Krakow. And like many founders of language companies, I think the portfolio of clients sort of naturally grew, and this is where I found a source of revenue for me, and I started my business during my university years here in Krakow, a small translation shop, and it is my first business.
Okay, and so if you go back to, like, you've already mentioned that you've got to like dual nationality family, but did you ever imagine you might have your own business when you were a teenager? Did you have any role models of entrepreneurs in the family, or friends or brothers or sisters doing it, or are they all a bit surprised that Krzysztof is doing what he does?
No. So I think it's a good question whether this is something that you can learn or it's something you're born with. So I don't come with from a family of entrepreneurs, right? I come from a middle class, not wealthy, not rich, just a middle class Polish family in a sense.
Can you describe
we did
that?
okay,
can you describe that for our
yeah,
listeners? Because we know what a middle class Polish family looks like, but our listeners,
a middle class European family. I think everybody.
You're milking the cow. You have a refrigerator.
We have had a lot of Krzysztof. We've actually had a lot of farmers on the show who became entrepreneurs. It's actually interesting. That's why he's saying that. But
but there's also this stereotype of Poland that and around the rest of the world that we're incredibly poor, and people are amazed that we wear shoes and have a fridge.
Okay, I don't know about that, but yeah, no, just just the middle class, not really wealthy, family. My mom, it was the four of us. I had three siblings, two sisters and a brother. So she always worked at home with, taking care of us. The children. My father had, a white collar, put it this way, job. He worked at a bank. Then he moved to the private sector. He worked at a company as an advisor to the board in the south of Poland. Yeah, and
Krzysztof, I'm confused a little bit about. Did you grow up in Canada, or did you grow up in? It sounded like you grew up in Like I'm actually don't even.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No. So I was born in Warsaw,
Okay.
Poland. So just to go back, my mom was born in Canada. She's a daughter of Polish immigrants.
Okay.
This is just after the war. My grandfather had to move out from Poland. If you know the history a bit, and he was he was a general in the Polish army, quite highly ranked, and obviously it was was very difficult times for them to continue in Poland. He had to move through Germany and the UK. He ended up in Canada in 1947, I think. My mom was born in 1949. And then as soon as it was feasible for them, they obviously wanted to always move back to Poland, very patriotic. I consider, although dual national, I consider myself Polish. And so they moved back in when she was about 20, I think 19 or 20. And that's in the, let's say, solidarity times in Poland. That's the ship that they were on, like one way, the way they were going to Poland was empty, the other way everybody was going the other way, right? So it's just very weird in a sense, but it was just when it was feasible for them to come and actually live their final days, my grandparents here in Poland, very important for them. So no, I was born here in Poland, but I did spend a back and forth years in Canada. I did my school here in Poland, but and speaking of entrepreneurship, I did I think as early as 15, or when I was 15 or 16, every summer I would go to Canada for 4 or 5 months and work on construction site, building golf courses, building different construction or building facilities in real work, waking up at like 5 a.m. or so, working for 12 hours. Obviously, the conversion rates at these times were more favorable than today. So I was actually able to make probably more than my father would make after 20 years here in Poland. Speaking of an hourly wage. So this was when I was 15. So early, 2000. I was born in 87, so whenever. But yeah.
Just what's your motivation then? Because your parents were middle class, so you didn't have to have the money. It wasn't to survive, but obviously you were it's a tough thing to do, to go to Canada and work for 5 months on a building site. So why were you doing that? Were you greedy?
Yeah,
did you want tons of money, or what was it?
I did. And it is about, I think, about that inborn entrepreneur, right? Because even if you move a few years earlier, before I was able to work, like I would probably, and I think my first job was selling. I probably sold half of the unused stuff in our house on a marketplace called Allegro. I think it went live in 1999, and at some point in the early 2000s, I think it was 2001 or 2, I was barely 12 or 15 or 14. I was one of the top ranked sellers on that platform.
Okay, just for people that don't know what that is, that's the Polish.
It's
eBay.
like an Amazon, right?
Or,
eBay, Amazon, yeah.
And you've also clarified that really Summa Linguae is your first big success, but actually you were in business earlier. You were doing, because actually the process, not everyone does this, the process of buying and selling stuff, and you had that earlier. And was that? Did you have anyone who gave you the idea, or did you just figure it out yourself?
No, it's just a buddy of mine at high school, or middle school, whatever you call it, gymnasium here in Poland. We did that together. We used to sell BMW key rings. I think we were virtually importing them from Italy or somewhere. He had a connection there. We really made it to the front page of Allegro. At some point, we were really one of the top ranked sellers on that marketplace. So I think, at some point and you had to ship them, like virtually go to the post office and pack them and all that. So we actually had 2 people from our school doing that for us, our first employees.
That's great.
Actually, I don't recall how much, but we made quite a bit of money, at least for the age that we were. So we're still very close friends with Pavel, a guy that we worked on this together. So I think it's something that you have in you, in a sense. And like my brother, for example, we come from the same family. He's the exact opposite, right? He has nothing to do with being an entrepreneur. He's more of an artist, of a romantic soul, just very different. So it's something I have. I think it's entrepreneurs have these sort of a different set of eyes. They see things that others don't. And that's just very very different and inborn. I would say it's something difficult to learn. You can get all the MBAs and studies that you can think of, but difficult to learn.
Krzysztof's in my camp, in my school of, like, we had a Harvard business professor on here, and he was actually teaching entrepreneurship at Harvard, and okay. I was skeptical of the ability to teach entrepreneurship, although it was interesting. But I agree with you that I do tend to agree with you that you have somehow you have it or you don't, and I don't know. But we have this show here in this podcast to try to understand what it actually means, because we don't know what it is actually.
Just coming back to your first, do you remember the first time you sold anything on Allegro? Like, do you remember your first sale? Was that like a wow, this actually works type moment, or was it just you were kids playing around?
I don't remember the first sale. It must have been, I remember a few transactions I regret, because had I not sold things, like we had this computer that my father brought from Canada. It's probably worth a lot of money now, and just as a relic, sort of, I wish I didn't sell it, but I did. And these things, right? I don't really remember the first transaction. These key rings from the BMW key rings were the real thing, in a sense, because we started importing them, and obviously we didn't have a business officially, right? It's
so if anyone from the Polish tax authorities are listening, they might come.
I think it's more than 20 years ago or something, so I hope it's like outdated, whatever it's called.
The statute of limitations.
Statute of limitations.
Well, the current government, they're going after people, so who knows? Wouldn't it be a sad end of this podcast if one of
Richard, I don't even know where you're going. I'm sure Krzysztof has a great, like, I think you should hold on to your first sales story or whatever, or big sales story. I bet you he's got a good one from Summa Linguae story. That there's always one there when you start a business, that you got a big first client or something like that. But maybe I don't want to interrupt Richard's train here of thought.
No, I think we'll drop the train of why aren't you in prison for tax evasion 25 years ago, or 30 years ago. But what I'm interested, like, did you imagine you were going to have a business? Like, obviously you started your translation. It's a very natural thing in translation. You gradually get so much work, you take on other people. And so that was a kind of evolution, which may mean there was never really a moment where you decided, this is what I'm going to do. Or was there like that moment, hang on, this could be such a good business. This is worth me devoting a big chunk of my professional life to.
I think, I don't know if I thought about this in such a way, but pretty early on, with my English and Polish, I thought, this is something I'm going to do. This must have been already in high school, so before university, because that's how I started, by working as an interpreter. I never liked the translation, the written thing, because just too lazy to do this, sit in front of a computer. I'm a people's person. another feature of an entrepreneur. I think you're more of a, people's creature rather than, it's not about IQ, it's more about the emotional intelligence, which I think is represented in how you are with people. So I went that route. So I don't recall the exact moment, but I think I knew pretty early on this is something it's worth exploring. I never thought it's going to be a business of that size now, and obviously, whatever happened later is just we'll probably dive into that later. But I didn't have this in mind, but I knew I'm going to do this as a way to pay my bills.
But you still decided to go to university, right?
Yeah. What did you study, by the way? I'm kind of curious now.
I did a 3-year BA in applied linguistics. So that's exactly, on translation, basically, not the philology studying or teaching part, but the applied translation part of language. I also did, before my university, I did a gap year doing a bunch of volunteering and traveling the world and all that. And during that 12-month period, I also did a course in Rome. And this was a multi-disciplinary course on different things, from public speaking to philosophy, and just many courses, a few months in Rome. But yeah, this is as much studying as I've ever done.
So then let's get to it then. Like, so in your studies, you start that whatever, and obviously interpreting, and you get some clients, and we're like, just how did this whole thing start?
Yeah.
Like,
so,
what was the...
so I had this one big client through a translation agency here in Krakow. I worked at a steel plant. There's a big steel plant in Krakow. I worked night shifts. Actually, I studied during the day. It was a 3-shift. They were building a German company was building a new coke plant in Krakow, right? As part of the whole steel facility here. So they required, obviously the Polish engineers didn't really speak English that well, so the Germans required a facilitator, and I worked, and this whole thing runs obviously 24/7, right? So I was the youngest, I had no family, so they put me on the worst shifts, right? So they were also the highest paid ones,
yeah,
right?
Of course.
Because who's gonna want to work at night in a coke plant in Krakow? I did, and Christmas Day and things like that. So this was a few years, and then if you recall, this was 2006, 2007. I think in 2008, a big steel crisis, together with the financial one, obviously hit the world. And hence the client has let all the external interpreters go, and I lost my job, right? So it was just really well paid. I think I must have been making, in speaking in today's terms, probably $2,500-$3,000 monthly on this. So for a student, 18, 19 years old, I think doing fairly well. And it was obviously difficult for me to go back. I had to still find a way of making money to pay my bills. So
were you saving money? It sounds like you did this construction site stuff. Like, it sounds like either you had an expensive life. Either you had an expensive lifestyle and you're into flashy stuff, or you were squirreling money away, so you had the money to start to invest in your business. And are you more like do you have like a big Ferrari outside your house, or whatever size Ferraris are, and the swimming pool and the helicopter? Are you that kind of guy, or are you more like have the money for the freedom than the stuff you can buy? Or
I think it was somewhere in between. I would not say I was just trying to be cheap and save every penny, and steal food from my people I lived with in a 5-person 2-bedroom apartment we were renting in Krakow, just to save. No, but I wasn't also spending left, right, center. or overspending. But I did, for example, the first, it's actually a funny story. I got my driver's license in Canada when I was 16. In Poland, you can get your driver's license when you're 18. And I made enough money to buy a BMW. It was obviously a used one, a 1996 3 Series BMW. So I bought it with the money I made in Canada, but I didn't have a Polish driver's license at the age of 17. And I drove around Poland, or around, where I lived, south of Poland, not Krakow, actually. I lived in Nowy Sącz for a while, without a Polish driver's license, using the Canadian one. I did get pulled over a few times, but I didn't speak a word of Polish, just used my Canadian license. And,
Krzysztof,
so
we're like brothers. Like we are,
okay.
like I have literally every story you have. I have the exact same story. This is
Oh, yeah?
ridiculous. Anyway, no, it's just really weird because I'm listening to this. I'm like, yeah, I spent the semester in Florence. You spent the semester sometime in Rome. I spent like every one of these, like you're going down the. Sorry, I capped the comment. It's just really weird. But yeah, you could get
So let
away
me ask
back in
you
the day
this.
with the. Yeah, sorry.
Let me ask you this. What was the first dream job you dreamt of having when you were like 5? Not 15 or 20, but like
No,
5 or
I
6 or
don't know.
7.
I didn't understand that. But the thing, another thing, but I was into selling stuff. I'm older
Okay.
than you. There was an Allegro. I used to go to a flea market that we had. I don't know if you know what a
Yeah.
flea market is, but that's like what they
Yeah,
had in like
yeah,
the
yeah.
East Coast. You go and sell junk there. And I had dreams of like having people set me up with cheap junk that I could sell. But like the
I
thing that
wanted
you're,
to,
yeah.
and the reason I'm asking is because I wanted to be a garbage man. Because when my grandmother and or my parents were taking me around for walks, I saw all those junk thrown away that I thought it's so exciting to find interesting
Yes.
stuff in it, and I wanted to have it. So that's I really virtually
It's
wanted to be a
crazy.
garbage man when I was 5 or 6.
That's so funny. That's so funny. No, and also not to harp on this brother thing, but like I have said my whole life that I'm lazy. It's like one of my main things that I've ever said. I've been driven
Okay.
to success by a
By
laziness.
laziness.
By
Basically.
Same
procrastination.
here.
And,
Same here. Yeah.
so is that delusion? I mean, I think for some of our listeners who haven't yet sort of started on their entrepreneurial journey, this may be a bit puzzling because Kimon actually, and although I know he's being truthful when he says he wants to be lazy, I've seen him work really hard for decades and decades efficiently, but it's taking. So, what's your definition of why do you think it is that entrepreneurs quite often have this desire to be lazy, Krzysztof?
Yeah, I don't know why. It's I think one of these, inborn things that they're perfectionists at some point, but also lazy enough to, ask others to do work for them. And I don't think there is an answer to why. I think it's just the way it is. Also, I think they realize that they can gain wealth by scaling, and it's difficult to do it on your own, right? So I actually never had a business I owned 100%. Even from day one, the business I had in, the translation business that is now Summa Linguae, I was never 100% shareholder, right? Or an owner. So partners or partnerships was also part of, let me partner up with somebody who can do part of the work or is better. I also never had an issue with, working with people, like, because sometimes you can think of entrepreneurs having an ego issue. I would never say that of myself. I think I always wanted to work with people who are better than me, so they can, help me become wealthier and better as well. Even from, that funny Allegro thing, right? I had a partner, and I didn't want to go to the post office, spend an hour in a queue and send and ship the crap out. I had other people doing that for me, right? So I think it's just something you have.
I'm not sure, and I'm not sure I completely agree. I think the laziness actually is, and it's the same issue, but there's a reason, there's an understanding that it's being much more focused on how to get things done than who does it. And for a lot of people, being hardworking means you're the hard worker, whereas for an entrepreneur, it's like, what's the most effective way of getting this done? And you drew attention to the scaling and the fact you didn't want to go and stand in the post office, but it's also, if you go and stand in the post office, you can't do anything else while you're doing that. So it limits the organization, and certainly looking at being happy with the outcome rather than being happy that you worked hard is part of being an entrepreneur, I think. So coming back to the Summa Linguae story, were there sort of particular, you had your clients, and how did you get your, when was the first time you stopped getting clients by personal recommendation or word of mouth? Or in fact, how did you get your first clients?
Well, so I recall this one very early on. I think SEO today a standard and very difficult to compete. I think our website, or the website I set up in 2009, I think I did invest a lot in SEO. I think these days, I don't recall the details, but it wasn't really widely understood and common. So I think we did pretty well on just internet marketing. And through that website, I think we attracted one lead, an e-commerce business from Germany, Conrad Electronics. I have no issues disclosing the name. They wrote to us. They were going live in Poland. Okay, so they wanted to set up shop in Poland. They had to localize all the products, right? Product descriptions and so on. So we were invited, or I was invited to a meeting in Germany. I went to Germany, and they had this, Kimon is going to know the name of the software, Richard. I don't know about you, but Trados, right? Trados was at least a market standard sort of way of translating content. It's a bilingual, let's say, interface where you translate on the right and you have the source on the left, right? Just the tool that our industry uses. At this point, I had no clue what Trados was. And they're asking us, or they're asking me, like, look, we have all that content, we'll send you all the files in Trados. I said, sure, we use Trados, everything. So I sort of faked it in a sense, and I sold, the moment I walk out of that meeting, I Google Trados and purchase my first license, right? So this I remember. And funny enough, the founder of Trados is now our board member and one of the investors. So I always tell that
is
story.
Really funny.
It's a funny one. Yeah.
So how did you do it though? Like, and then how was the partners? Like, tell us, because like you said, you got partner. Like, just what's the story? Like, that's maybe one of the first clients, but like, you went from, I'm trying to figure out, you went from this interpreting and the steel thing, and you lost, actually, that's where I'm sort of like where you are. Like you just lost your job at the steel thing, and you're used to making a certain amount of money. And then but you did also mention something about getting involved with other people. So like, how did you scale it? And sorry, I don't want to ask multiple questions in one thread, but then also what was and then what was the thing that when you said, because you said you weren't really sure that this is, I don't know, it sounded like you weren't really sure. Was there a moment, the light bulb moment? Was it this Trados thing? Was there a light bulb moment when you said, holy shit, this is the thing that, this is the thing, I got to do this. This is a great thing, or something like that.
Yeah, so no, I as soon as I got fired, just a few months later, I opened up my business, officially register as a translation business, that whole website thing. And then it's probably the only few months that I'm really on my own, in a sense, without a partner, right? And then I meet this guy virtually in an elevator. He lived in the same building that we were renting our apartment, studying, right? And he carries a golf bag, right? And it's not, at least at the time, it wasn't really a popular sport. So I chat him up because I also, from my Canada days, I can play some golf. So I chat him up, and we start talking and so on. And the next thing that I go and he used to run some advisory business, like an advisory boutique, maybe small investment sort of boutique. And I approached him with a question about debt collection, right? Because I had a few clients at this point, and I had some issues collecting the money from them, right? They wouldn't pay me, or it would take too long, and so on. Again, I had nobody in the family that could help me with this, and so I didn't even know of like ways of collect debt and so on. So and he offered to help. And the next thing I know is I write 50% of the company over to the guy, right? Virtually. It was probably, and you can argue whether it was the cheapest way of learning or the most expensive mistake I made in my life. But a few years later, and not long, because it must have been in 2012. So probably 2 years later, I buy him out completely for a few 100,000 zloty, maybe 100,000 euros or so. I think it was one of the cheapest lessons I've learned, the way of learning. But so this is how I got my first partner. Early on, we got into some issues, or he more like he got into some personal issues with things that I don't want to get into, but and we just had to part ways. But this is, how I've opened a limited liability company with him, and how I got my first real company, in a sense, together with a partner, a 50% shareholder, that I replaced him. And then in 2 years later, I did replace him by obviously buying him out, like I said, and also partnering up with a different LSP from Warsaw. And this is how in 2012 or late 11, Summa Linguae was made, right? By a merger of two translation companies.
An LSP means language service provider. That's not a term everyone. So
yeah.
that just means for most people understand a translation company.
Translation, yeah.
Set up translation. And if you were advise someone listening who hasn't yet had any business partners at all, and what would be your main advice to someone about choosing partners? What would be the most important one or two things you'd look for before you actually start have someone as a shareholder in your business?
Yeah, I don't have a great track record. I did have to part ways with a number of them.
So you must be an expert by now. or maybe flip it around. Flip it around. What things should you avoid? That's another way of saying.
I was just jumping into it without giving it much thought. I'm much smarter now, and obviously, value my. I think I just have much more to lose at the moment, so it's a little different. But these early days, I was just I meet a guy in an elevator. Virtually 2 or 3 weeks later, I give 50% of my company to the guy, right? So, and then we meet this other guy from Warsaw, and like 2 months later, we merge our businesses, and I replace one guy with another guy I barely knew. So I think what I would say now is probably a match in values, right? And also some form of a clash of egos or roles in the business, right? So if your values match and you have a well-defined role and who's going to do what, then it's probably, the chances are it's going to work out. But at the end of the day, and even now, if you ask me, people, and it's not the first time I keynote panels or conferences, and people tend to ask this stupid question, like, how did you achieve, the success, or why is it successful? I would say it's freaking luck, right? Honestly, I have no problem admitting, hard work and all these things, and laziness, entrepreneurship, and all that, but it's luck. You have to be lucky.
Just to be clear, because people quite often don't realize how big translation companies can be. And you're a publicly listed company on the Warsaw Stock Exchange, so this is not secret. Can you just tell us what your estimated revenues are for this year, 2022?
Some $35 million or so.
Okay, so it's not a small business anymore.
Small to medium size, I think. In our industry, and Kimon knows very well, we're big, we're in the top 100 or so, because it's a fragmented industry. But if you think of any other industry, a $35-40 million business would probably think from moving from Poland to maybe opening up shop in Czech Republic and Slovakia. Whereas my business, we already have to be global from, India, Poland, Scandinavia, North America, and so on, because that's how it works in our industry. But it's not a huge business.
So I really appreciate your modesty and humility, because not everyone does what you do is so open about making, basically pretty fundamentally risky mistakes of giving half the company to a stranger and so on, or doing those deals. Was there a moment at which you suddenly realized I need to professionalize this? So because that could be a different, like I can't do it like this anymore. You said you've got more to lose now, and obviously now is now, but was there any like turning point where you suddenly thought,
Yeah.
this isn't the way to do it?
So we grew, from, let's say, 2012 as Summa Linguae with this new partner, and he was completely passive, right? So I took care of the whole. I was the CEO and managing the whole show. I at this point in time, I got very ill. I had a tick bite me. If you recall a disease called Lyme disease, I got the pretty serious version of this thing, and I was completely out for a few years. Actually, I was half paralyzed in a hospital, just very, very bad version. So business was really on idle gear for some time. We didn't really grow so much, but it didn't, it was just I couldn't really spend a lot of energy and time I didn't have on this. And I got gradually better and better after a series of treatments and whatnot in 2015, 2016 probably. And this is when we sort of reopened the business in a sense. And this is when I realized we need to either I do something else. It's not exciting to run a by then probably $1 million translation business, working with, half of my revenue was with the government in Poland, the other half with some, corporate or individual clients here. It wasn't really something I would want to do for a long time. I had bigger ambitions. So I said, okay, let's try and reopen the business in a sense, restructure the business. And this is where we sort of started. We went public in 2015. I attracted some early investment. We did a few smaller acquisitions. In 2016, we did our first international acquisition in India. And this is how I also teamed up with my current business partner, Madhuri. She owns some 10% of the company and runs our operations. We work together very well as business partners. I would say that's 2015, 2016. My personal situation allowed me to kick this off again. So that's probably
I think we need to focus on this because, at least if I'm hearing correctly, you went from $1 million to 35 million in 6 years. Right. And I think that all this like background and how you got here, but let's not lose sight of how the hell do you go from 1 to 35 because I'd like to hear that story because that's like I know the slog. No, and I actually know where you're coming from because I also feel like I slogged for years for that little bit of that small piece, and then all of a sudden the big numbers came relatively fast later. But I do want to hear, how do you go from, sorry Richard, I can see you want to say something, from 1 to 35 though.
Yeah, and again, coming to the going public when you're a small company, again, where did that, and you talked about your ambition. I mean, obviously you come across people who do that, but there aren't that many. And again, did you have someone like advising you beside you, saying, hey, there's this way of doing it that's different, or did you read it in the newspapers? Because that's not something that happens to everyone, what you've done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so again, I would say luck, because I met, in our first office, 2011, I think, the next door neighbors, this new law firm just opened up, and we sort of got acquainted, or they're friends till date. They still work for us. They did all look after all our acquisitions from a legal standpoint, and they sort of introduced this way of going public to us. We're traded on the alternative stock exchange called New Connect in Poland. It's an alternative market for smaller companies. It was fairly new at the time, and Agata, who's the partner in the law firm, she was one of the first law firms in Poland taking companies public on that stock exchange, on that market. So she introduced this idea to me. But to be fair, and that's one of these stupid things that I always wanted, like that first BMW, I probably always wanted to be a CEO of it or have a publicly listed company. Not that it makes any difference, but just one of these stupid things I have to admit to, I guess.
Well, you check the box.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So Krzysztof, how did you go from 1 to 35 in 5 or 7 years? Like, give us the helicopter view of that. I mean, I know I don't want to, like, obviously I know personally, I know some of the story, but I want you to, I want you to tell us how you did it.
Yeah. So first of all, we grew organically, but a substantial part of that growth comes from acquisitions, right? So I think by now, if you take an average, we would acquire one company a year, sometimes even 2 companies a year, right? So, and obviously with the size of the snowball, it keeps growing and growing, and you keep buying bigger and bigger.
But where do you get the money from?
Right? So yeah, I did really struggle, and that's probably one of the most difficult things, because it was really up until say 2019 or even 2020, it was just, I don't wish anyone to go through this, because this came at a huge cost, and it's like a death. You run a small business, as a one-person shop, or then you start hiring the first people, and so on. It's relatively okay, and the moment you start making, you have a good living, and so on. Obviously there's some risk involved, and so on, but it's not terrible. You're not you're not full time with anybody, you're on your own. But the moment you decide to really go big and go bold, you enter that death valley, and it's freaking scary, right? Because the decisions you make, they're so interdependent. And like I bought companies with I didn't have the money to pay for. So I had to, I structured the price of the deal or many deals in a way that it's contingent upon me raising the money in the year to come. Otherwise, I don't have the money to pay them, right? So it was just a few years of a huge roller coaster, a journey that has a toll on my health, that had a toll on my personal life, on it's just very, very difficult, sleepless nights. And now it's obviously a success, and I'm
trying to understand though, Krzysztof, and even that I'm so familiar with how this all works. And then, but I'm just trying to understand. So like, where was the like, I'm going to ask directly, is it, were you borrowing money? Were you getting investors? Was it trying to raise money? Where was the strat? And like, you didn't have the money to pay for something, and you were like negotiating with investors. Like, what was this? Can you describe this hell a little bit more?
Yeah. So first of all, obviously, as any business, we had some assumptions on how much money we're going to make, and it never worked, right? Always and I tell you, that's one feature. If we're talking about like a checklist of entrepreneur, like if you're an entrepreneur, if you make good business plans, you're really not very likely to be a good entrepreneur, right? So the 20-sheet Excels don't work. So I never made any good business plans. And so the little plans I had never worked out. So I was always short on this, right? So I had to source and fundraise from elsewhere. So I had a group of individual investors that I borrowed money from, or that I raised equity money from, right? And this was a very difficult, you're a small services company. Obviously I was trying to differentiate and pitch a good equity story, but at the end of the day, I was a small services company, right? With big plans. And I had, my decks were amazing, but that's all I had. I was a deckware or a slideware company at the point in time. So very difficult, right? But I did attract, and it's probably, if it's, as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, you have to be good at hiring great talent and raising money, right? And this was all I was doing for the time. Obviously, being you're a sales. At the end of the day, you're in sales, right? You sell your company to investors, and you sell your products or services to your clients. This was my job. So yes, with the little we had, we paid partially in our shares. as a listed company was easier, and we paid some portion of the purchase price for the deals that we closed in that period of time with well, obviously with cash, and then postponed part of the payment for a year or two in forms of earnouts or just delayed payments. And the way it was always structured is that, well, if everything worked according to plan, which it never did, I would have the money, but I never did, right? So I had to raise again. It was just more and more difficult to a point where it was really difficult, right? Really difficult. So, and that's the thing, right? That's that valley, the death valley, right? If you want to grow, and at least that's my experience. There are others, obviously, that were more lucky, but for me, it was really hell. It was really very difficult. I don't wish my son, I don't wish anybody to go through that period of crazy growth. But you know, had one thing like, I'll give you an example where it all sort of ended. In 2019 December, we sold 51% of the business to 3 private equity firms, right? I provided a way of, it was a partial buyout of most of these minority shareholders that have invested. They made great returns on the deal, and a big influx of capital to the company to sponsor our further acquisitions and so on. The company was then valued at about 120 million zloty. Probably we sold at a 9x or so on our profits, right? So a good deal then. At the point we were at, I think, at 80 million zloty, right? So whatever the dollar,
like 20-ish million,
20 or so, yeah. But this was a crazy deal. This was really a crazy deal because the way it was structured was the following, right? So first of all, I had 2 companies, one in the US, one in Canada, that I was supposed to buy with the money I didn't have, right? And so all these 3 things were contingent upon each other, right? I had the Canadian company I was bidding for, and this process was highly competitive, very good data business. We'll speak about data, I'm sure, as you know, as our strategy in a while. So very, very difficult to buy because it was competitive. We paid about $10 million, $9.5 million for it, right? Then I had the second company, a smaller company, a more traditional translation setup in the States. So I was bidding for these 2 companies and doing due diligence, right? Checking if everything's fine. This is a process that takes months in foreign geographies, right? Canada and the US, very expensive. And at the same time, this private equity group was doing due diligence on us. And with the money they were supposed to invest, I was supposed to pay these 2 owners with, right? So, and then at the same time, I had to gather a group of about 10% or 15% of my previous shareholders to also sell their shares to the private equity guys, right? For this whole thing to make sense. And at the same time, I was also obviously working on my organic results because the whole business model, and these guys are awesome at writing these 20-page Excels. They have to, that thing has to work, right? So all these 5 things together, and I had about half a year to do it. I didn't fucking sleep, right? It was so, and like one thing doesn't work. Just imagine like one guy, and this one guy had a bank account. He's from Lebanon. He had a bank account in Lebanon, like, and he had to fly to Warsaw with the owner of this translation business in the States. He had to fly to Warsaw to actually, and the money would not go to Lebanon. KYC, AML, whatever. These things, like one thing doesn't work, that whole thing goes to shit, right? Mm-hmm. And I would virtually go bankrupt probably if that didn't. If
wow,
this was the craziest thing, right? But it worked. It worked.
Krzysztof, you're being very sort of modest and humble along the side. This at the same time making clear that you really worked your backside off. You really put in the hours and everything like that. But you obviously were persuading people to sell to you. So when you were acquiring companies, did you present a slightly more professional image of yourself than you're presenting to our listeners, in the sense that, because, you know,
really no,
or was it the money you're offering enough to mean, no, I don't care how just.
I don't think so. I think, and if you ask me, it's about, you know, I think that's another another characteristic of a good leader or entrepreneur, I'm really authentic. I'm exactly the same with you guys on this podcast. I'm exactly the same with my employees. And I'm exactly the same with the guys that I try to buy companies from, or my investors. I'll give you a funny story. In the COVID times, restaurants were closed, right? So you couldn't really go and eat out. And well, honestly, there's, in I think most geos, there's this underground, or there used to be this underground dining where some restaurants were unofficially open and so on. So I'm sitting on a board meeting in 2020 with a group of, with my private equity guys, right? We have many board meetings once a month. They look at these 20, Excels that they make and compare them with the reality, and I have to explain why it's different. So just talking to them, I said, look, guys, I have this dinner appointment with my wife. We would have to be wrapping it up, and all the restaurants are closed. So I go on about telling them how I use this underground dining facility in Krakow. And then my CFO calls me right after, Chris. He says, like, Chris, are you stupid? Like, you're actually admitting to your investors that you're doing something like illegal, or I'm like, dude, if I were to think of all these things, like,
that's like Elon Musk getting high on Joe Rogan.
Yeah. And really, so one thing, I'm just authentic, Richard. So
well, I think that's an incredibly important lesson for listeners, that Krzysztof is real. He's not just some dude you meet in a bar who's BSing. You can look him up.
No, but hold on a second. I think, Richard, where you're cutting it, I think where you're coming from here, and Krzysztof, I'm sure that it's true. I know that this is all true, that you're authentic and all that, but I'm sure you weren't telling the guys that you were buying that you're on the brink and that you need this. You were definitely saying, I've got the money. because
no, absolutely. Yeah. Overselling. So I've oversold most of the time. Same with this first big sale, right? To Trados story. The same thing, right? I had no clue what Trados was, right? This was 100,000 euros, 80,000 euro deal for us at the time. Huge for us, right? So overselling to some extent, yeah. I have to be very careful now because with, like I said, I have much more to lose. And, if you let a group of private equity guys take majority of your shares in the business you have to run, I'm best friends with my lawyers and all the compliance and all that. So that's slightly different now. And it's difficult, and it's very difficult because these guys, they make their money by avoiding risk, right? The lawyers, if you think about, like, their whole life is about just de-risking life. My fucking life is about taking risk as an entrepreneur. So we have
but you've gotten to the stage of interest. Yeah. But you've gotten to the stage where you'd like to de-risk as well now, right? Because you've gotten it big enough that you want to de-risk it.
True. But it's difficult to get along with these guys and the lawyers and all that if you're just you come from two different worlds, right? Yeah. You have this risk that's just
I couldn't agree more. No, and I actually totally agree with you, because actually I find I get very frustrated, and I'm sure you do too. I just get very frustrated with them. Because it's like, come on, can't we just do this? Why are we messing around with this stupid? Anyway, but I totally know where you're coming from. Anyway, I'm conscious of the time, and then there's a lot to talk about. So when you gave the intro of your company at the very, very beginning of this podcast, I don't think you used the word translation in there. So I think you've pivoted this business. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about that, and then if we can then move into where you're going with this whole thing, basically.
Yeah. And this is also why and how I got from 1 to 35, right? In very early on, I sort of realized that, well, early on, I mean 2017 probably, I realized that the commodity of selling translation services is not going to really make me big and make a lot of money. I saw translation services as part of, or translation content as part of a bigger data puzzle within these companies. And that's something that caught my attention. And again, by a means of a coincidence or luck or providence, we've received this request for what was called, I think, multilingual tasks or language tasks. something like that, from a client of ours, and we looked at it and we said, look, this is data work. This is not translation. And we pivoted or started pivoting. And then this was also our guidance for acquisitions. We bought 2 companies in this domain, and the margins we make on data work, we can explain to the audience more about what it is. But we make, our margins are much better. The industry, the data industry, obviously driven by the growth of AI, is growing much faster than the translation industry, and so on. So about 60+ % of our revenue is now coming from data services and not translation services. We do still have a good footprint, obviously, in the traditional localization space, but it's actually a minority at the moment. And this is what I think moved the needle and accelerated the growth very rapidly.
Can you explain the data business then to someone who's, imagine someone very non-technical, who's reasonably intelligent, that's our audience, but they're not technical?
Yeah, so a few use cases, right? So, you build, and we work mainly in the voice and text formats, right? So there's image, there's video, there's, self-driving cars that need a lot of image to learn, and so on. We don't really do much of that, but in the voice, let's talk about voice. So you have speech assistants, right? You have car systems that you talk to. You have a Google Assistant. You have Alexa. All these voice assisted products. They obviously need a lot of natural voice to learn from, to be able to understand Richard, your UK accent, Kimon, your American accent, my Polish Canadian, who knows where from accent, and so you need a lot of recordings, basically. Then collection, right? You have to ask people all around the world that speak this given dialect or given language to record.
Now, sorry, just to be clear, I think to help everybody, it's not only English. That's the whole point. These are multilingual. Yeah. These are multilingual data sets. So it's not only English, various English kinds, but it's like so these huge companies, they want to be in all the countries of the world. So that makes it so complex.
So we collect that, right? So we have an app, a crowd of people that record different things for us, and we collect that. Then once you collect it, you obviously need to curate it or prepare it in a way for that AI engine to be able to learn from, right? So in layman's terms, so we do that, right? Then you have a lot of text.
Sorry, when you say curate, you mean you're giving description. So like you're going to describe that this is this type of person, discuss like what data,
annotation, you flag, for example, it's fairly complex, right? You annotation, labeling, you do name what part of speech is what, you need to transcribe it. You then look for things that you probably want the systems to flag, like you have to watch for content that may have traces of pornography, or the words that you would not want your system to use, or things like that. There's much more. Think about another use case, gaming, right? People play games and online games, and obviously in these chatbots, they exchange a lot of conversations. They're usually not very polite, and there is, drag trafficking. There is just kids, a lot of problems with like suicide and so on, right? They're mental, closed in these virtual realities, right? So we help these companies spot that, right? Train the systems, the AI system, to learn and pick that and spot that, flag it, to be able to react, right? So a lot of such use cases, right? You have a lot of other interesting work that comes from just the inherent multilingualism, Kimon, like you mentioned, and the fact that the world is not English and it's global, and all the companies want to sell and work with the global audience. So taxonomy, a lot that has to do with systems. Like, for example, there's a project we're working on at the moment, very complex, where a spin-off from the Cambridge University wants to well, categorize and bucket all the legislation from all around the world, right? So if you, let's say you query anti-money laundering laws, right? And you want laws in that bucket from different countries or the countries of your interest, right? It sounds simple, but it's very complex. You need to elevate taxonomy to a multilingual knowledge graph. In a sense, you can't translate it, right? Because the pure translation is not going to work. Machine translation, you need to build that knowledge graph from scratch. So all that work that we call data is basically aimed at, making products native in all these different languages, products that use AI, and now obviously most do or want to do.
So basically you've pivoted your language business into an area where there is currently, and there will continue to be more and more demand because of the the emergence of AI. And so then and that's obviously, I'm aware of that as well. I think it's a really smart move. And so that just brings us to 35 million, whatever, all this stuff. Where does it go? Where do you go? So you got this AI 60, I can't remember whether it's 60 or 40%. So let's say 60% AI business. Where do you go from here?
So look, I think, and that's something we haven't touched upon. And since obviously I made some money on Summa Linguae, I did also invest in other companies. I probably invested in some 10 companies till date. So I would not say I'm an investor, a professional investor by any means, but I did have a few investments I made. Some of them went, very well. Some of them I bankrupted, or the companies I invested in bankrupted. So went bust. So, but I did make some money, and I think from very early on, I look at all the companies I invest in and the companies I built, or Summa Linguae, as products for sale at the end of the day. And it might sound brutal, it might sound scary, but at the end of the day, and also Summa Linguae and the share, it's not my stock, it's not something I want to pass on to my son and my family. And it's something that I will sell, that I have partially obviously sold already. And so, and I think it's good, because at the end of the day, if you build something for sale, you build it with value in mind, right? You might have different motivations if you build it to pass on to your family, but I built this company to exit from, right? So with the highest valuation possible. So and I'm also very authentic and transparent about this with all our employees, right? We follow a business framework called OGSM, or part scaling up, part OGSM. And in our statement, it talks about building our company with value for the shareholders in mind. It's very important, right? So it drives your decisions. So this is something that I will obviously sell. Now, if you work with private equity, their business is obviously in buying and selling. So at some point, an exit will come, and it will probably also be an exit for me. But this is, it's always been in our strategy. It doesn't change the strategy of the company. Obviously, the new buyer might have a different vision. That's something we can't control. But in a sense, we continue expanding in our data, on our data strategy. We do continue our acquisition strategy, M&A strategy. So very acquisitive, we think, and intend to be buying anywhere from 1 to 2 companies, or 1 or 2 companies a year. So that's part of what I do in the company, or big chunk of what I do in the company is, talk with smaller companies that want to maybe sell. So that's obviously on our plate. We do continue and intend to still outgrow the industry. Our industry obviously grows by some 6-7%. The AI space is in the 20s, and we want to be closer to the 20. Obviously, probably, somewhere in between 10 and 20. So low double digit organic growth, data with valuation in mind, value for the shareholders in mind. That's where I'm
Cool.
steering the business.
So it sounds like you've been very transparent about the fact that whatever, you have private equity who owns your company. So you're definitely have an exit in your future. And that you said that might be the end for you in terms of your work with Summa. So that brings out, you're so young and what's next? Like, what's next on this? And you've gotten the education, man. You've gotten the real, whatever education you said you had, you got the real education now. So, and you're young and you have money and you have education. What are you going to do?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have it planned out. I'm not a guy that would, I don't have the 10 years or 20 years of my life planned out. I think, I'm fairly well connected in a sense. I'm very active in the entrepreneurial community here, and not only here. It's you've mentioned EO. I think at the beginning of the conversation, Kimon. I'm part and actually a founder of the Polish chapter of an association.
Tell us a little bit. Just give us the high level, whatever, the 20,000, 30,000 foot about EO, so everybody can hear. Because I think I may have mentioned it before we went on recording.
Oh, okay. Yeah, EO Entrepreneurs Organization is, and I think the biggest, world's biggest organization for entrepreneurs. It's a spin-off for maybe wider known organization called the YPO, born in the US in '87, and now probably gathering about 14,000 people across the globe that are either founders or owners or significant owners of businesses with revenues upwards of $1 million in case of EO, and 13 or 14 million dollars in terms for YPO, in YPO's case. So just very just a very well, to me, a very important organization. I brought it to Poland together with a few other guys. I met EO in India and in Germany through my contacts there. Just amazing vibe, amazing connection, many learning opportunities.
And what's just briefly the value? Like, what's the value proposition? What's the value? Like, why should I join?
Yeah, so a few let's say principles, right? So first of all, it's an organization that you will not that you can benefit from a very wide range of learning opportunities, right? Extremely well connected within many universities across the globe. There's probably 2 courses a day that you can attend if you want to, in some country somewhere, right? So extremely well connected in terms of learning. Now, the second value is the network, right? Because you have 14,000 peers in the organization that you can directly connect to. There is a 24-hour reply policy. So if I pick somebody in the US or in India, they should reply to me within 24 hours. And I know they're owners or founders of a business. There's the full profile on the app, so you can check them out, and just help me a lot and immensely with many international needs that I had, or even just my, I'm in the US or in India for a trip. I have a day off, weekend, whatever. I just want to hang out with somebody. Just a great way of doing so. And there is a non-solicitation policy in the organization, so I'm actually not allowed to be handing out
nobody selling to you, and
and
you're not selling to anybody.
no,
yeah, that's good.
No, and that makes it very easy, or much easier, right? Because the person that I'm pinging knows that I'm not here to sell him something, right?
Right.
So that's important, right? Then obviously there is a third aspect to it. It's called forum. It's the smallest unit, 6 to 8 people, 6 to 10 people. We meet frequently, once a month, according to a 6-hour agenda. Brings a lot of value. It's based on experience sharing. And again, that's a principle in EO. You don't give advice. You're not going to hear an advice from a fellow EO member. You will hear experience, and then you do whatever you want with that experience. You're not going to be judged. You're not going to be advised. you will hear a lot of experience. That's something very important. And it's also the last thing I want to say. It's not only about the business aspect of your life. There is a triangle that we call of let's say, dimensions of your life. Business is obviously an important part of it, but you're also part of a society, and you're part of your family or your personal life, right? So family, society, or community, your personal life, and then your business. And EO provides opportunities in all these three categories, right? So very important for me. So maybe I'll get involved more, or through my EO connections, I obviously have a lot of opportunities. I also do have other, companies I invested in. So just I'll be opportunistic. That's something, another checkbox on my list of who's an entrepreneur. You're just like, I can't plan for this, right?
Right.
In detail. And it's also not helping me. Like, if I were now to sit down and plan my future after exit, like, I don't know, maybe it will be in 2 years, maybe in a year's time, maybe in 3 years. I'm not going to spend my time on it. I'll do fine.
I'm absolutely sure you will. And opportunistically, I'm going to follow up with, I used to be a member of YPO a while ago, and I'm going to be in Australia next month. And I was just thinking it would be really useful to plug into this EO thing. So I might drop you a mail and ask whether there's something, because it could be interesting. It could be interesting for me as well. And I think you've done a great job of advertising it. This is a podcast about you, not about what we do, but there's some different.
But if there is an advice, I don't give advices following the EO principles. You're not going to hear an advice from me. But if there is an advice to young or to entrepreneurs, join EO. That will help you a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a great recommendation. And is there anything else you'd like? I think we're basically drawing. Is there anything else you haven't shared from your story that you think is important that our listeners ought to know? You've done a fantastic job, and I really appreciate your openness. And I think it's been a great listen. So thank you.
Well, maybe the only thing that is always very important to me that we haven't touched upon, we've spoken a lot about, the upbringing and the education or the lack thereof, or and my business. But I think, and I always mention this, probably one of the best decisions in my life, and something that holds me strong and is the foundation of most of what I do, is my family, my wife. And my family, very important to me. That aspect of my life is just, probably the most important aspect of my life. It helps me immensely with the business as well, because it's a safe haven I can always go back to. It's if you have your personal life messed up, it's not helpful with the business. So just, my wife and I were together for we're married for 10 years, together for 14, I think. It's just a very important part of my life, especially when you're going through hardships like the death valley I described, or my personal, problem that I had with my health. Extremely important. So I always give credit to my wife for my achievements, if you can call them that way, and it's just very, very important to me. So.
What a great note.
Very good. That's a very good note. And obviously, we can't control the quality of our personal lives, and we try to as much as we can. But I think what I want to emphasize is having that in balance. Don't underestimate how important it is to have that piece in balance as well, for your business success as well as for your personal happiness. So I'm with you completely. I'm with you completely on that. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I did learn some stuff about you, like I was hoping to. Like, we both I drove an American car, and I also spoke English to the police when they stopped me. So I did awesome. I did the exact same thing as you. So whatever, it was a lot of fun, and I think this was a useful episode. So thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.